Today we're going to move on to Jainism. Jainism is the third of the four major religious traditions to come out of India, and specifically northern India. The interesting thing about Jainism is that it actually has a lot of similarities to Buddhism, but some interesting differences as well. So we'll talk about how it's similar and different to Buddhism. Jainism begins with a single founder, Mahavira, although it does trace its origins back much farther. So similar to Buddhism, we have the life of a founder, which really starts this religious tradition, although as we'll see, their myths of origin date the religious tradition back much, much earlier. Mahavira lived in northern India from about 599 to 527 BCE. So as you can see, Mahavira lives at almost the exact same time as Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, and in a very similar geographical location. Both of these individuals come from the northern part of India. Jainism is a strictly atheistic religion. Other than atheism, which some people argue is a religion and some people argue is the opposite of religion, Jainism is a religious tradition that is absolutely atheistic. There is no belief in any type of god or goddess, yet it does have everything else that we consider part of a religious tradition. So we'll see how this atheism works within a religion. Jainism is also completely dedicated to ahimsa, which translates to nonviolence. Jainism is primarily focused on the idea that in order to achieve enlightenment or nirvana, one must completely dedicate themselves to not harming any other living thing. So we'll talk about how this plays out in this very strict emphasis on this type of behavior. Today there are about 5 to 8 million Jains worldwide, so it is a much smaller religious tradition than some of the other religions we've been looking at, but it's also very interesting to learn about as it has some key differences from the other traditions that we've learned about so far. So Jainism begins with the enlightenment of Mahavira, but he is considered to only be the most recent of 24 jinnas or tirthankaras. A jinna means a victor, so it's someone who has believed, it is believed that this person has conquered samsara, so they are victorious against samsara and achieved enlightenment. So as you can see, there's a lot of similarities here with Buddhism. The key concepts of samsara, karma are still at work here, as well as nirvana or enlightenment. So a jinna is someone who has achieved enlightenment within Jainism, and they're also known as tirthankaras. A tirthankara is a teacher, so it's someone who can help others attain this liberation, moksha, or nirvana. So Mahavira is simply believed to be the most recent in a line of 24 of these that have come to earth, discovered how to achieve enlightenment, and then shown others the way. The life of Mahavira closely mirrors that of the Buddha, of Siddhartha Gautama. So he also left home at around age 30 to find enlightenment. They come from similar parts of the world. They're both raised Hindu, although Mahavira is part of the Kshatriya clan, caste, so he's also a part of this warrior caste. And around age 30, he decides that he wants to leave home, leave everything he knows, to conquer suffering and find enlightenment, just like Siddhartha Gautama did. He engages in strict asceticism, also like the Buddha did. However, unlike Siddhartha Gautama, Mahavira finds that it is this asceticism which is the only way to achieve enlightenment. If you remember, Siddhartha Gautama found that this strict asceticism, after he had done it for a while, was actually more of a distraction. He found that starving oneself and denying oneself any sort of pleasure or luxury is something that actually becomes a hindrance to achieving enlightenment. So the Buddha decided to follow what we call the middle way. That is absolutely not what Mahavira found to be true. He finds that it is this very, very strict asceticism, the denial of any type of luxury or pleasure or anything like that, that finally leads to his enlightenment. So it's believed that Mahavira engaged in this strict asceticism for 12 years. after those 12 years, he achieved liberation. He achieved nirvana or moksha. However, like the Buddha, he decides not to enter full enlightenment, but to stay around on the earth, or to stay around in this lifetime and teach others how to achieve that enlightenment. He becomes a teacher for the rest of his life, teaches others about Jainism, begins this religious tradition, gains followers, and then it's said that he achieves liberation through absolute nonviolence at age 72. So this is referring to his death, when he achieves full liberation, full enlightenment upon death, through his absolute dedication to nonviolence or ahimsa. In terms of their doctrine, what they believe, so like we said before, this is an atheistic religion. They believe that the fundamentals of the universe, like samsara, karma, and moksha, are just simply there. It is just the way the universe works, but there was no God or deity that put that system into place. We are all trapped in samsara. In order to achieve liberation from samsara, we have to go through many lifetimes to achieve this good karma. At one point, we will all hopefully achieve liberation or moksha, and then we won't have to come back in reincarnation. We won't have to be born again. So they have a similar worldview as Hinduism and Buddhism, but they don't believe that there's any deity or anything like that that put this system into place. This is just how the universe works. So everyone, therefore, is responsible for their own salvation, which is also similar to Buddhism. So it is up to the individual to realize this worldview, to come to accept this worldview, and then to dedicate themselves to ahimsa in order to gain good karma, in order to one day achieve liberation or moksha. So we're all trapped in samsara, and we're all trying to achieve moksha. One very important difference, however, between Buddhism and Jainism is that Jainism believes that not only are humans and animals a part of samsara, plants are as well. So plants are also considered sentient beings that need to accumulate good karma and can also achieve moksha. So really everything that is alive in the universe is a part of samsara for Jains. In order to achieve moksha, we have to accumulate good karma. So Jains believe that every action that we do is either accumulating good karma or bad karma that is sticking to our soul, or our Atman. One interesting difference here is that Jains believe that karma is actually a material reality. It is a physical substance that becomes stuck to our soul. So Jains believe that every person has a soul, so very similar to Hinduism and the Atman, and that bad karma actually dirties our soul. It makes it black. So they believe that the soul is like a physical location inside you that you can locate, and that when we do bad and accumulate bad karma, our souls basically get dirty. And then good karma is the wiping away of that dirt. So moksha is envisioned as creating a perfectly clean and clear soul, removing the dirt of any bad karma. And how we do this is through strict asceticism. So we must deny ourselves luxuries, such as, too much food or too many possessions, and we have to live a life focused on non-harm to any living thing. And remember, for Jains, this includes other humans, animals, and plants. So this is a much more intense form of non-harm than the one we saw in Buddhism. In terms of ethics, Jains have 5 principles. These are ethical rules that they try to live by. So the first one, which we've talked about already, is absolute non-violence and non-harm to every living thing. And this includes people, animals, and plants. And non-harm, according to Jains, is defined as harm in deed, harm in word, and harm in thought. So you can, of course, harm someone else by physically hurting them, by doing something that will hurt another living thing. It could be through word, so saying something harmful or malicious to another living thing, or even in thought, thinking negatively about another person, animal, or plant. This, of course, is an incredibly high standard to live by, and for the individual Jain, one's life is a struggle to try to do this as much as possible, but there is an acceptance that this is very, very difficult, and everyone will fall short of doing this completely, because to live a human life, you simply must harm some living things, especially plants, because we have to eat. So there has to be some level of harm involved in life, but the goal for the Jain is to try to minimize that harm. There's also a focus on non-possession of material things. So Jains will try not to accumulate too many material possessions. And there's also a practice of frequently, going through what you own and giving away anything that you don't need. So it's kind of constantly keeping yourself in check in terms of how many possessions you own. There's also a focus on truthfulness, that Jains should be absolutely true in everything that they say. And because there's such an emphasis on this, there is a focus on not making absolute statements because truth is relative. So what this means is that every time I make an absolute statement, something is something else, I'm not being completely true because someone else might perceive that truth differently. An example of this would be if I'm in a room and I say, it's cold in here. I happen to be someone who gets cold very easily. So if I say, it's cold in here, that might be true for me, but there could be someone else in the room that it's actually warm for them. They prefer the temperature to be a little bit lower. So if I say, it's cold in here, I'm technically lying. I'm technically being less than absolutely true because that perception is relative and it may not be true for someone else. So in order to avoid this type of untruthfulness, Jains will usually end absolute statements with in some ways. So I could say, it's cold in here in some ways, because then I'm allowing for the fact that that's my perception of the truth, that's my perception of reality, but there could also be a very different perception of that. There's also an emphasis on sexual purity. This is usually understood in the same way as it's understood in most religious tradition, which is no sexual relations before marriage or outside of marriage. Non-stealing, which is just not taking what is not given to you. And there is an emphasis that your intentions are the most important thing. So with the non-harm, because this is so difficult to live by, your intentions, of course, are very important. If you intend to live a life in which you try your best to not harm any other living thing, that is the most important thing. You're going to always end up harming someone or something, but if your goal is to minimize that as much as possible and you live by that, then you are still accumulating good karma. In terms of ritual, we have several rituals here. On a daily basis, Jains are encouraged to participate in something called pratikramana, which is a confession and asking for forgiveness. So in the Jain religious system, there's an emphasis on non-harm, but there's also an acceptance that you are going to harm things in the course of your daily life. So therefore, there's a need for pratikramana, confession and asking of forgiveness. Ideally, this is supposed to be done twice daily, and if done fully and thoroughly, can actually take up to 3 hours. What it is it's an individual reflection back on your day or however long it's been since you have last performed this ritual, and to think carefully and to reflect on any person, animal, or plant that you have harmed. Did you think badly about someone? Did you say something bad about an animal? What is any type of way that you could have intentionally or unintentionally harmed someone or something else? So you reflect on this, and then you ask forgiveness of what you harmed. So there's no God to ask forgiveness of, but you're actually sort of asking the universe for forgiveness, or asking whatever it is you harmed for their forgiveness. And this is something that, more devout Jains will do on a daily basis, but it's encouraged to be done on a regular basis, however often you have a chance to do it. There's also devotion to images of the jinnas. So these are the victors, the individuals, especially Mahavira, who have conquered samsara, who have achieved enlightenment or moksha. The image in this slide is of Mahavira, and you may have noticed by now that all the images of Mahavira show him naked. This is because during his 12 years of strict asceticism, while he was seeking out enlightenment, he had a focus on non-possession of any material items. So this was one of the things that he had to get rid of in order to achieve enlightenment. So this was done in such a strict way that he had to give up even the clothes that he was wearing. So he could not own anything. And if you have clothes, if you're wearing clothes, then you are owning those clothes. So eventually, he gave up everything, including any type of clothing. So this is sort of the image that is portrayed of him, of someone who gave up everything in order to achieve enlightenment. So images of him are usually of him completely naked, because this is how he achieved enlightenment. On a monthly basis, Jains will engage in fasts. This is something that is encouraged on a regular basis, because the focus on non-harm includes plants. Of course, all Jains are vegetarians. That's something that's very important. But you have to harm plants in order to eat. Even if you're a vegetarian, you have to eat fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, things like that. Anything like that is harm. You are still considered to be harming those living things. So anytime you can go through a fast, you can stop eating, is a way of minimizing your harm. Of course, this has to be balanced by being healthy and eating enough food to live, but fasting on a regular basis is something that is encouraged as a way to continue your effort to harm as little as possible. There's also the giving away of possessions, which we already talked about. Jains are encouraged to frequently go through their possessions and to give away anything they don't need. Of course, in this life, we have to own things. We have to, live somewhere and have clothing and have a car and things like that. But there is an emphasis on trying to keep it to a minimum, to give away anything extra. If you start to accumulate too many things, you should go through your things and give them to charity. On a yearly basis, we have two important times of the year. The first one is Chaturmas, which is a 4-month period of special observation. This is a time in the year when Jains are encouraged to especially focus on non-harm, to especially try to live their lives in a way that they are minimizing harm to all living things. This is also the rainy season in India. So during this time, there's a lot of bugs and insects and things like that in the air, because it's an especially humid time of year. So many Jains will avoid traveling during this time to keep from harming insects, because anytime you're out and there's a lot of just insects about, you might end up accidentally killing more than you normally would by stepping on them, by swatting at them, anything like that. So it's encouraged to not travel very much, to stay home as much as possible, because that is minimizing your harm to others. Another important holiday of the year is Diwali. We talked about Diwali already in terms of Hinduism. This is a very important holiday in Hinduism. But this is also a holiday that is celebrated throughout India for many different reasons. So because Jainism is coming from India, they also do celebrate Diwali, but they celebrate it for a different reason. Jains believe that Diwali is the day on which Mahavira achieved enlightenment. So they celebrate it as the New Year as well, which Hinduism does also, but is also a day to honor and reflect on Mahavira's enlightenment. And then the last one we have here is Salekana. Salekana is something that is very special in Jainism, and it shouldn't be thought of as something that happens on a regular basis. Salekana is the personal decision to fast unto death. So this means to give up eating or drinking anything so that you can die with a completely clean soul. So what happens with this is that really only a Jain monk or nun would do this. So monks and nuns in the Jain tradition are very important. It is believed that really only in the lifetime of a monk or a nun can someone achieve enlightenment, because regular everyday life involves so much accidental and unintentional harm to other beings that it's just impossible to do. It is not until that lifetime that you can devote yourself to being a monk or a nun and completely devote your entire life to non-harm that liberation becomes a possibility. So this is something, first of all, that would only be chosen by a monk or a nun to do. And this would be something that would only happen at the end of a person's life, when they were quite elderly, when they were pretty much assured that their life was coming to an end anyways in terms of their health. And it would be with the assurance that this person is relatively confident that this is their last lifetime. They believe that they are on the verge of achieving enlightenment. So what happens with this is someone decides that they are so close to achieving enlightenment, they believe this will be their last lifetime, and if they can die with a clean soul, with a soul that has no bad karma on it, that they will achieve moksha and they will not have to be reborn again. So the decision is to end one's life with no harm, absolutely no harm, which means you have to fast. You have to not eat anything, because eating always involves the harm of another living thing. So this is a choice to end one's life through starvation, through intentional starvation, in order to die with a completely clean soul. But remember that this is something that does not happen very often. It's a very important and weighty decision, and it is not taken lightly in the Jain tradition, but it is something that does happen. In terms of experience, there is no God before which to have a numinous experience. So that's just something that is not a part of this religious system. So therefore the experience is all going to be mystical. But of course, because it's an atheistic religion, that mystical experience is quite different, because it's not a union of the believer with the divine. So Jains do practice meditation. That's something that's also very much a part of their tradition. One common way that Jains meditate is actually on the figure of the swastika. You may have seen this symbol come up in connection to Jainism in this PowerPoint, or in your reading, or in the video. The swastika is originally an Eastern religious symbol. It was used and manipulated later by the Nazis to fulfill their own purposes, but it's important to note that they took that symbol from Eastern religions. It has been a part of these traditions for a very long time. For Jains, the swastika has 4 points on it, and for Jains, the swastika can either symbolize the 4 parts of Jain society, which are monks, nuns, lay women, and lay men. So that can be one interpretation of what the swastika means. And it can also be the 4 parts of samsara, the 4 types of beings that live in samsara. So plants, animals, humans, and underworld beings, or those who have a lot of bad karma. So Jains will frequently meditate on the image of the swastika and reflect on these 4 parts of society, or 4 parts of samsara. And they will also ask for forgiveness. So they're asking everyone, every living being, for forgiveness. So it's kind of related to the pratikramana, but this becomes a mystical experience for Jains. It is a mystical experience with all of other living things. It gives a deep sense of interconnectedness, that everything in the world that is alive is a part of samsara, and therefore one must dedicate one's life to minimizing harm to any other living being. So that would be the chief type of mystical experience in Jainism. And lastly, we have society. So monks and nuns are a very important part of Jain society because it is acknowledged that one can only achieve liberation in the lifetime of a monk or nun, that it takes that decision and that level of commitment to minimize your harm to the level that you could achieve enlightenment. So they are seen as very important teachers for lay women and lay men. They are very respected and honored in Jain society because they have made this decision to commit themselves completely to ahimsa. So as we said before, the swastika can symbolize these four parts of Jain society: lay men, lay women, monks, and nuns. Jains are a minority in Hindu India. So remember, Hinduism is the main religion in India. That is the vast majority religion. So Jains are, they come from India. The tradition itself originated in India, but they are a minority there. However, they are seen as integrated fully into Hindu society. Jains often intermarry with Hindus. This is not seen as something that is not allowed or discouraged. These two religious traditions are actually seen by Jains and Hindus to be in many ways very similar. Even though there are stark contrasts between them, it's seen as there's no strong enough contradiction that would be a problem for a Jain to marry a Hindu. That's seen as very much okay in Indian society. Also in North America and Canada, many Hindu temples often share their space with local Jain worshippers. So if you choose to visit a Hindu temple, you might also see a statue of Mahavira, and Jains coming to that space to show their devotion to the image of Mahavira. So again, these two religions are seen within Indian society to very much work together and to not have any sort of friction or tension between them. They often worship together and they marry each other. A Jain is not allowed to perform a job that harms anything. Kind of similar to Buddhism, that part of the Eightfold Path was to choose a career in which you wouldn't cause any additional harm to anything. This is also a part of Jainism as well. So any type of job that would require you to harm a person, an animal, or a plant would not be okay. Because of this, Jains often go into the careers of banking and business. These are seen as jobs or professions that minimize harm. And because they practice austerity is sort of minimizing one's access to luxury, they have become very successful, and they are actually known, have a reputation of being very successful members of society in Indian society, and also places where Jains have immigrated to, like Canada, England, and the United States. And also, interestingly, Jains are often at the forefront of environmental movements. Because Jains see the natural world, plants, trees, flowers, anything like that, as part of samsara, they are the ones who oftentimes are at the forefront of these movements to help nature, to help the environment, to preserve and protect the environment. So they're very much involved with this movement, this green worldwide movement, and they often are leaders in that movement because of their dedication to non-harm of the natural world.